The sun had only just begun to climb above the red cliffs of Arizona when the small town of Dry Creek started to stir. Dust rose from the streets as horses clopped past weather-worn buildings, and the air filled with the mixed smells of leather, smoke, and morning coffee. People gathered near the wooden platform in the center of town, where traders had set up their wagons. It was market day, the day when goods were traded, supplies exchanged, and sometimes lives were decided. Among the noise of bartering voices and rattling wheels stood a young Apache woman named Nayeli. Her wrists were bound not with chains but with rough rope, a symbol that she was not free. Her dark hair fell in waves down her back, tangled from travel, and her eyes, deep brown and alert, watched everything around her. She was quiet, calm on the outside, but inside her heart was beating fast. She had been taken from her homeland many weeks ago after her village was scattered. She did not know if anyone from her family still lived. All she knew was that this was to be her final stop. The traders called it a hiring market, but everyone knew it was more than that. Men stood around, whispering numbers and studying the people brought there, looking for strength, obedience, or beauty. Some came to hire workers for their ranches. Others came for darker reasons that went unspoken. Nayeli could hear bits of English and Spanish words. Some she understood, some she didn't. She had learned enough to know what they meant when they looked at her and talked about her price. The morning light touched her face, and she lifted her chin. Even now, she refused to show fear. Her grandmother had once told her, "The sky sees everything. Stand proud so the sky will remember you." She remembered that now, and it gave her strength. The crowd thickened as the day went on. Cowboys, miners, and travelers from nearby towns came to see what was being offered. Children ran through the crowd laughing, unaware of the sadness standing before them. An old man with a white beard and sunburned skin shouted from the platform, calling out names and prices. He called Nayeli the last Apache woman from the southern hills. The crowd murmured at his words. To some it was curiosity, to others, just another trade. A dry wind blew through the square, lifting dust and bits of straw. Nayeli closed her eyes for a moment and thought of the stream near her childhood home, the one that sang over smooth stones. She had washed clothes there with her mother and listened to her father's stories by the fire at night. Those memories were all she had now, and she held them tight inside her heart like small glowing coals that could not be stolen. As the trader continued his calls, some men approached her, asking questions. One man with a cigar squinted at her as if judging a horse. "She looks strong enough," he said. Another replied, "Too proud. She won't last." They spoke as if she couldn't hear. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the buildings where the desert opened wide. If she could just reach that horizon, she thought, she could be free again. But for now, the ropes around her wrists reminded her that dreams had to wait. Near the edge of the crowd, a tall cowboy had stopped his horse. He looked out of place among the noisy buyers. His hat shaded his eyes, but there was something in his stillness, quiet, watchful, different from the others. His name was Elias Monroe, a man known in nearby towns for his steady hand and soft voice. He had once been a soldier, though he spoke little about those days. Now he worked from ranch to ranch, fixing fences, training horses, and keeping to himself. Elias hadn't planned to stop in Dry Creek. He was only passing through, hoping to buy supplies before heading south. But when he heard the crowd's shouts, curiosity drew him closer. As he tied his horse near the post, he saw the platform and the people standing on it. Then his gaze fell on Nayeli. At first, he didn't understand why she stood so still while others around her looked down in shame. There was something in her posture, strong, proud, almost regal, that caught his attention. The trader's voice echoed through the square, but Elias barely listened. He saw the dust on her face, the fatigue in her stance, and yet beneath all that, a quiet fire that refused to fade. A child nearby tugged at his mother's skirt and asked, "Mama, why is that lady standing there?" The woman whispered, "Don't look, child." Elias heard the words and felt a tightness in his chest. He had seen many wrong things in his life, wars, hunger, injustice, but something about this moment felt heavier, more personal. He turned to leave, but he couldn't. His boots stayed rooted in the dirt. Meanwhile, Nayeli's mind drifted between fear and calm. She could sense that her turn was near. She didn't understand all the words being spoken, but the tone of the trader's voice told her enough. She looked down at her hands, rough from work and travel. and whispered softly in her own language, a prayer not for escape, but for courage. She wanted to face whatever came next with dignity. The crowd's laughter grew louder when one man made a crude joke, but Nayeli ignored it. Her focus stayed on the horizon, where a line of sunlight split the sky from the red earth. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the town. The trader called out again, asking for bids. A few voices answered, but then there was silence. People shifted uncomfortably. Maybe it was her quiet strength, or maybe they feared she would never obey. The trader sighed, muttering that she would be more trouble than she was worth. Elias stepped forward, almost without realizing it. The crowd turned to look at him. "How much?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The trader blinked in surprise. "You want her?" Elias met his eyes and said simply, "Yes." He didn't add why. He didn't know why himself, only that something deep inside him refused to walk away. As the trader named a price, Elias reached into his coat and handed over a small pouch. The coins clinked softly, and the trader's grin returned. "She's yours," he said, waving his hand. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the show was over. Nayeli watched as the man who had spoken stepped toward her. She studied his face, dusty from travel, eyes tired but kind. He didn't look like the others. He didn't stare with ownership or pity. He simply nodded to her and said, "You can walk beside me now." She didn't answer, unsure if she could trust him, but she followed as he cut the rope from her wrists with his pocket knife. The rope fell away, leaving faint marks on her skin. For the first time in weeks, she could move her hands freely. They walked through the crowd quietly. Some people whispered, some laughed, but Elias didn't look back. Nayeli walked a step behind, uncertain of what her freedom meant. When they reached his horse, he offered her water. She hesitated, then accepted. The cool liquid touched her lips, and she realized how thirsty she had been. For a brief moment, her eyes met his. She saw no cruelty there, only a strange gentleness that puzzled her. As the day grew hotter, they left the town behind. The noise faded, replaced by the sound of hooves and wind. The desert stretched wide and endless before them. Nayeli turned her head one last time to see the small town shrinking in the distance. The platform where she had stood was now just a blur of wood and dust. She didn't know where they were going, or why this man had helped her, but she felt a quiet sense of something new, perhaps hope, or perhaps just relief that she was moving away from that place. Elias rode beside her, saying little. He sensed her fear and didn't want to frighten her further. He thought of the people he had met in his life, the choices he had made, and how this one moment might change everything. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew one thing. No one should ever have to stand on a platform like that again. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Shadows stretched long across the sand. Nayeli glanced at the cowboy and wondered what kind of man he truly was. He had bought her freedom, but for what reason? She didn't ask and he didn't offer. For now, silence was enough. As night approached, they stopped near a small stream to rest. Elias started a small fire and handed her some dried bread. The flames flickered between them, lighting their faces softly. Nayeli watched the fire and thought of her grandmother's words once more. The sky sees everything. She looked up, and for the first time in many days she saw stars instead of smoke. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt that her story was not ending. It was only beginning. And though she sat across from a stranger, somewhere deep in her heart a tiny spark of trust began to form. The desert was wide, the night was quiet, and for the first time since her capture, Nayeli felt the faint whisper of freedom in the wind. The morning after they left Dry Creek, the desert looked calm and endless. The air was cool, and the horizon shimmered with soft gold light. Elias Monroe rode quietly beside Nayeli, who sat behind him on the horse. The sound of hooves on the dry earth was steady, like a heartbeat. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Words, they both felt, were not yet ready. Elias was a man who carried silence like an old friend. His life had been full of noise once, shouting commanders, galloping horses, and the chaos of gunfire from the border wars. Now he preferred the quiet. The wide open spaces gave him peace, though the memories never truly left him. Sometimes at night he would wake suddenly, hearing echoes that were not there, It was in those moments he realized he didn't quite belong anywhere anymore. Not in towns, not in ranches, not even among other cowboys. He was a man between worlds. He had stopped in Dry Creek only to rest his horse, maybe buy new boots, and then ride south toward the hills. But something in the market had caught him off guard. He had seen many things in his years, men trading cattle, land, even silver. But the sight of a proud young woman standing on a platform treated like property had shaken something inside him. He didn't act out of heroism. He acted because he couldn't stand still any longer. Something deep in his heart had whispered, "Not again." Now that she was riding with him, he wasn't sure what came next. He hadn't planned this journey, and he didn't know what to say to her. He looked over his shoulder once in a while to see if she was comfortable. She sat straight, holding lightly to his coat, her face unreadable. Her dark eyes studied everything, the land, the sky, even him. She didn't trust him, not yet, and he understood that. Trust wasn't something that could be given in a single day. By noon, the heat had grown stronger. They stopped under the shade of a rocky cliff where a small stream flowed. Elias helped her down from the horse and handed her a tin cup of water. She drank slowly, her movements quiet and graceful. He noticed that even in her exhaustion, she carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity. She was young, perhaps 20, but there was an old strength in her eyes. Elias gathered some dried meat from his saddlebag and offered her a piece. She hesitated before taking it. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I mean no harm." She didn't answer but looked at him with cautious curiosity. Her English was limited, but she understood tone more than words. And his tone, calm and gentle, told her enough. After they ate, he began fixing the horse's saddle strap, which had loosened on the ride. Nellie watched him closely. His hands were rough, his movements careful. There was something almost sad in the way he worked, as if he were always fixing things but never himself. She wanted to ask where he came from, but she didn't have the words. Instead, she pointed to his horse and asked quietly, "Name?" Elias looked up, surprised to hear her voice. Her name? Dusty. Dusty, she repeated, her accent softening the word. "Good horse." He nodded, smiling. "Yes, good heart." It was the first small bridge between them, simple but real. They rested for an hour before riding again. The land began to change as they moved farther south. The red cliffs gave way to long stretches of golden grass and dry riverbeds. Birds circled overhead, their cries sharp against the wind. Elias thought of how strange fate could be. One morning he had been alone. By sunset, he was responsible for someone else's life. That thought both scared and comforted him. He decided to find a safe place for her, perhaps a mission or a ranch that would take her in. But when he imagined leaving her there, something inside him twisted. He didn't understand it yet, why the idea of parting with her already felt heavy. Maybe because she reminded him of the things he had lost: family, kindness, and faith in people. As the sun dipped lower, they reached a cluster of tall rocks that offered shelter for the night. Elias gathered dry twigs for a fire, and Nayeli helped by bringing small stones to surround it. She worked silently but efficiently. When the fire began to crackle, she sat cross-legged across from him, watching the flames dance. The light touched her face, and he saw the exhaustion there, the deep weariness that came not from the journey but from all she had endured before. He didn't ask her about her past. He knew that pain often needed silence more than questions. Instead, he told her a story about his horse, how Dusty had once thrown him into a cactus patch when he was learning to ride. Nayeli laughed softly, the first laugh he had heard from her. The sound was small but warm, like a fragile flower blooming after rain. Elias chuckled too, realizing how much he'd missed hearing laughter, even his own. Afterward, they sat quietly, each lost in thought. The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars. Nayeli gazed upward, whispering something in her native tongue. Elias listened to the soft rhythm of her words. He couldn't understand them, but he felt their meaning, something sacred like a song carried by the wind. He finally asked gently, "What did you say?" She looked at him and replied in slow, careful English, "I talked to Sky. I say thank you for today." He nodded. "That's a good thing to say." Then, after a pause, she added, "You, different from others." He raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" She searched for words. "You, not take, you help." Elias didn't know how to answer. He poked at the fire and said quietly, Maybe I'm just trying to do one thing right. They slept a short distance apart, the fire burning low between them. Elias lay awake for a while, staring at the stars. He thought about how his life had turned out, a long road with few friends and many regrets. He didn't know where this journey with Nayeli would lead, but for the first time in years he felt a small sense of purpose. Not the kind found in orders or missions, but the quiet kind that grows from kindness. In the early morning he awoke to the sound of gentle humming. Nayeli was already up, kneeling near the stream, washing her face. The melody she hummed was simple, soothing, and filled the air with peace. He listened without speaking, not wanting to interrupt. The sun rose, lighting her hair like threads of gold. For a moment the world seemed softer, almost new. They broke camp and rode on. Along the way they passed small valleys dotted with wildflowers. Elias pointed out the names of a few plants: sagebrush, yucca, mesquite, and Nayeli repeated them, learning each word carefully. In return, she told him the Apache names for them, her voice gentle but proud. Through these small exchanges, a quiet friendship began to grow. At one point, they came across a group of travelers resting by the road. The men glanced at Nayeli with curiosity, but Elias spoke first. "She's under my protection," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for questions. Nayeli noticed how his voice changed when he spoke to others. Strong, steady, commanding. But when he spoke to her, it was calm and kind. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. As the sun began to sink again, they stopped near a hill overlooking a valley of tall grass. Elias pointed ahead. "There's a small town 2 days from here," he said. "Maybe we can find supplies and decide what comes next." Nayeli nodded. She didn't know what her next path would be, but she knew she didn't want to return to the world behind them. For now, this road, this horse, and this quiet cowboy were her only certainty. That evening, they sat by another fire. Nayeli roasted a few cactus fruits she had gathered. Elias tasted one and smiled. "Sweet," he said. She smiled too. "Good desert gift." He looked at her across the flames and said softly, "You've got a strong spirit, Nayeli." She tilted her head. "Spirit?" "Your heart," he explained. "It doesn't give up." She nodded slowly, then pointed at him. "You same?" He laughed. "Maybe." The stars shone bright again that night, and the wind carried a faint song through the grass. Elias felt something shift inside him. A quiet understanding that this journey wasn't just about saving someone. It was about saving himself too. Nayeli watched the firelight dance in his eyes and thought how strange life could be. Yesterday she had been standing on a wooden platform with her future uncertain. Today she was free, riding beside a man she barely knew but somehow trusted. The road ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, she felt she was moving toward hope, not away from it. And as the night deepened, the cowboy who didn't belong anywhere began to realize that perhaps he had finally found a reason to stay. The next morning began with a calm silence. The air was cool, and the first rays of sunlight spread across the wide desert like a golden ribbon. Elias and Nayeli had already packed their few belongings. Dusty, the horse, waited patiently as Elias tightened the saddle. Nayeli stood nearby, watching the horizon as if listening to something far away. Maybe the wind. Maybe her own heart. They had been traveling together for several days now, and though they spoke little, a quiet understanding had grown between them. Elias had learned that she preferred to walk sometimes, feeling the earth under her feet. He didn't stop her. He knew what it meant to want to feel free again. As they moved farther from towns and trails, the land opened wider. Red rocks, dry rivers, and long stretches of sand that shimmered in the heat. Elias had traveled through many places, but this land felt alive in a different way. The air carried whispers of stories long forgotten. Nayeli could sense them too. Sometimes she would touch a rock or close her eyes when the wind blew, and Elias could tell she was remembering. They stopped near a small canyon for rest. A thin line of water trickled between the stones. Nayeli knelt beside it, cupping water into her hands. Elias sat nearby, taking off his hat and wiping his brow. "We'll stop here for a while," he said. "Let Dusty rest." Nayeli nodded, her face calm. "Good," she said softly. Then she looked at him with a question in her eyes. "You go where now?" Elias thought for a moment before answering. "Nowhere in particular," he said with a faint smile. "I just keep moving." "Always moving?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. "It's easier than staying still." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him and then said, When you move too long, you forget where home is. Her words were simple, but they struck something deep inside him. He looked down, turning her words over in his mind. He hadn't thought of home in years. Maybe because he never really had one. After a quiet meal, they set out again. The sun was bright and the desert wind carried the scent of dry sage. Hours passed and the silence between them was not empty. It was peaceful. Elias found comfort in her presence even when they didn't speak. She reminded him that life still had warmth left in it, that not everything was lost. By late afternoon, they reached a wide plain dotted with tall grasses and small cactus flowers. It looked endless. Nayeli pointed to the sky where a hawk was circling high above. "Free," she whispered. Elias looked up too. "Yes," he said softly. "Free." As they walked, Nayeli began to tell him more about her past. Not everything, but enough. She spoke about her village by the river, her mother's songs, and the stories told by her grandfather under the stars. Her English was broken, but her meaning was clear. She spoke with feeling, her voice steady but sad. Elias listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He could hear the strength in her memories, the love she had for her people and her land. When she spoke, her eyes glowed with something bright, something that couldn't be taken away. When she finished, she looked at him and asked, "You have family?" He paused. "Once," he said quietly. "A long time ago." She tilted her head. "Where now?" He took a deep breath. "Gone," he said simply. "All gone." She didn't ask more. She only nodded slowly, as if she understood without words. The wind blew between them, soft and kind, carrying their silence away. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and pink, Elias noticed something strange. A thin line of dust in the distance. He stopped the horse and narrowed his eyes. "Riders," he murmured. Nayeli turned to look. The faint shapes of horses moved across the horizon. She felt her heart tighten. She didn't know who they were, but she knew enough to be cautious. Elias stayed calm, but his mind worked quickly. "We'll go through the canyon," he said. "It's narrow and hidden. They won't follow easily." They moved quietly, guiding Dusty between the high rocks. The sound of hooves faded behind them. Nayeli glanced back, her face tense but steady. She didn't ask questions. She trusted him now. When they reached the canyon center, the air was cooler and shadows danced along the walls. The sound of water echoed faintly in a spring nearby. Elias helped her down and said, "We'll rest here until night. It's safe." Nayeli sat by the small pool, dipping her fingers into the clear water. The reflection of the sky shimmered on the surface. She looked at Elias and said softly, "You help me." "Why?" He hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because it was the right thing to do." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled slightly. "Right thing," she repeated. "Good heart." Her words warmed him more than he expected. It had been years since anyone had said something kind to him. That night they made a small fire under the shelter of the canyon wall. The stars shone above them like 1,000 tiny lamps. Nayeli sang softly, a song from her childhood full of peace and memory. Elias leaned against a rock listening. The melody carried through the air like a prayer. He didn't understand the words, but he felt them deep inside. When she stopped, there was a long silence. Then he said quietly, "That was beautiful." She smiled faintly. "Song for journey," she said. "Keep spirit strong," he nodded. "It works," he said. They both laughed softly, a small sound but warm and real. The next day they continued through the canyon, moving toward the open desert again. The land grew rougher and the sun was hotter. Elias could tell Nayeli was tired, though she tried to hide it. He stopped often, giving her water and shade. She never complained. Her strength impressed him. She moved with quiet determination, as if she had made a promise to herself not to break. By afternoon they reached a ridge where they could see far into the distance. Below them stretched a sea of sand and stone, vast and golden. It looked endless. Nayeli stood beside Elias, the wind lifting her hair. "Beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he said. "Hard but beautiful." She turned to him. "Like life," he smiled. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like life." They walked until the sky began to darken again. The air cooled and the first stars appeared. Elias found a sheltered spot between two large rocks and they built another fire. The light flickered across their faces. Nayeli looked thoughtful. "You think," Sky watch us? She asked. He nodded slowly. Maybe, I like to think so. She smiled. Then Sky knows. We try to be good. He looked at her, feeling a quiet respect that went deeper than words. She was young, but her wisdom came from a place far beyond years. He realized that she wasn't someone who needed saving anymore. She was saving him too, in ways he didn't expect. As they ate their simple meal, Elias told her stories from his travels, about rivers that shone like silver, towns filled with laughter, and mountains so high they touched the clouds. Nayeli listened with wide eyes, her imagination painting each scene. Then she told him a story her grandmother once told her, about a spirit bird that guided lost travelers to safety. When she finished, Elias said, "Maybe that bird brought me to you." She laughed softly. "Maybe it bring both." The fire crackled between them, warm and gentle. The night was quiet except for the sound of the wind moving through the canyon like a song. Elias leaned back against a rock, feeling peace settle over him. The road behind them was full of hardship, but the road ahead, though unknown, no longer felt lonely. Nayeli lay on the sand, looking up at the stars. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we find new place." Elias nodded. "Yes," he said, "a better one." As the fire burned low and the stars shimmered above, the two travelers, once strangers, now companions, drifted to sleep under the same sky. Neither knew what awaited them beyond the desert, but both carried something new inside. Hope. And in that wide, silent land, hope was enough to keep them moving. The morning air was cool when Elias and Nayeli began their journey again. The desert stretched wide and endless before them, glowing softly under the early sun. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and wild sage. For days they had been traveling farther south, moving away from towns and closer to the mountains that stood like silent guards on the horizon. Nayeli walked beside Dusty, the horse, her long braids swaying with each step. Elias rode quietly, his eyes scanning the distance as if reading the land. He was careful, always watching the trail, always alert. The world could change quickly out here. A dust storm, a wrong turn, a stranger with uncertain intentions. But he wasn't worried for himself anymore. His concern was for her. They spoke more often now. The silence between them had turned into comfort, and their words came naturally, simple and real. Nayeli's English was improving each day, and Elias found himself learning a few Apache words in return. When she taught him a new one, she would laugh softly at how he pronounced it, and he didn't mind. Her laughter had become something he looked forward to. One afternoon, as they rested under a group of mesquite trees, Nayeli noticed Elias looking at a small, worn-out notebook. "You write?" she asked curiously. He looked up, surprised. "Sometimes," he said. "Old habit, what you write?" He smiled faintly. "Thoughts, places I've seen, things I don't want to forget." She nodded slowly. "Good. Words keep memory safe." He liked the way she said it, so simple yet true. He looked at her for a moment, realizing how much she had changed since the day he first saw her standing alone on that wooden platform. Her fear had faded, replaced by quiet strength. She was free now, and though she still carried sadness, it no longer ruled her. As the sun climbed higher, they packed up and continued their journey. The heat shimmered on the horizon, making the land look like it was melting into the sky. They had little water left, and Elias hoped they would reach the river by nightfall. "See that ridge?" he said, pointing ahead. "Beyond it, there's a river. We'll stop there." Nayeli nodded, her eyes focused on the path. "I can walk more," she said softly, noticing the tired horse. Elias shook his head. "Dusty's strong. Don't worry." But she still walked, saying it made her feel alive. And in truth, Elias admired that about her. She wasn't afraid of the land. She walked with the calm confidence of someone who belonged to it. By evening, they reached the ridge and looked down at a wide valley painted in gold and orange by the setting sun. A river ran through it like a silver thread, and tall cottonwood trees lined its banks. It was the most peaceful place either of them had seen in weeks. They made camp near the water. Nayeli washed her hands and face, smiling as the cool water touched her skin. Elias filled their canteens and started a fire. As the flames grew, the orange light reflected in Nayeli's eyes. "This place," she said softly, "feels safe." Elias nodded. "It does." They ate quietly, listening to the gentle rush of the river. Fireflies began to glow among the reeds. The world felt still, almost magical. For a while, they forgot the long miles behind them. They were simply two souls beneath a starry sky, sharing warmth and quiet company. Later that night, Naili sat near the water, humming a soft tune. Elias listened from where he sat by the fire. The melody carried through the air like a gentle promise. When she finished, she looked at him. "You look at stars much," she said. He smiled. "Always have. They remind me that the world's bigger than my troubles." She nodded thoughtfully. "My people say stars are eyes of ancestors. They watch so we not feel alone." "That's a good thought," he said softly. "Maybe they're watching us too." "Maybe," she said with a small smile. For a long time they sat in comfortable silence. The connection between them had grown beyond words. They were two travelers who had found trust in a world that had given them little of it. The next day, Elias woke early and climbed a nearby hill to scout the land. From the top, he could see the long stretch of desert they had crossed. The view was breathtaking, a sea of gold and red under the morning sun. He took a deep breath, feeling peace he hadn't felt in years. When he returned, Naili had prepared breakfast, a small piece of bread, dried fruit, and water. "You look happy," she said with a smile. He laughed. "Maybe I am." She looked at him, her expression soft. "You should keep it." "Keep what?" "Your smile," he chuckled. "I'll try." They continued traveling along the river, following its winding path through low hills. Birds sang in the trees, and for the first time in a long time the road felt light. The bond between them had become something unspoken but strong, a quiet friendship built from shared miles, shared silence, and shared kindness. When the afternoon sun began to fade, they found another place to rest, a small meadow surrounded by tall grass. Nayeli picked a few wildflowers and tucked them into her braid. Elias watched her with a gentle smile. "You like flowers," he said. "Yes," she replied. "They live short, but they make the world pretty." "That's a good way to see it," he said. "Maybe people are the same." She tilted her head. "People make the world pretty too?" He nodded. "Some do." She smiled softly. "You one of them." Elias looked away, embarrassed but touched. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply said, "Thank you." That evening, as the sun dipped low, the sky turned a deep shade of pink and gold. Naili watched it with wonder. "Every sunset is new," she said. "Yes," Elias said quietly. "Everyone is different, just like every day." She turned to him. "Then every day is a gift," he nodded. "It is." The night came with cool air and 1,000 stars. They sat close to the fire again, speaking softly about dreams and memories. Naili told him she wanted to build a small home one day, near water with flowers and songs. Elias listened, and though he said nothing, he pictured it too. Not just her dream, but himself in it. Something gentle had grown between them. Something pure. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it lived in every glance, every shared smile, every act of kindness. It was the bond of two hearts learning to heal together. Before sleeping, Nayeli said quietly, "You helped me find freedom. Now I help you find peace." Elias looked at her for a moment, the firelight warming his face. "Maybe that's what this journey's really about," he said softly. She smiled. "Yes, journey for both." As the fire faded to glowing embers, Elias lay back and looked at the stars. The past no longer felt as heavy as it once did. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Beside the soft sound of the river and the whisper of the wind, the two travelers drifted into sleep, not as strangers or as savior and saved, but as equals bound by trust, respect, and something that was slowly becoming love. And in the quiet of that desert night, their bond became stronger than any promise, a bond written not in words, but in the peace of two hearts finally learning how to belong. The morning light spread softly over the valley, painting the land in gold. The river shimmered like a long silver ribbon winding through the earth. Elias woke first, hearing the quiet hum of the wind and the whispering trees. For a moment he just sat still, watching the calm beauty of the world around him. Nayeli was still asleep near the fire pit, her blanket pulled up to her shoulders. The soft glow of dawn touched her face, and Elias noticed how peaceful she looked. Not frightened or lost, but calm, free. He smiled quietly to himself. Somehow, without even realizing it, her presence had brought light back into his life. When she woke, she smiled and greeted him with a soft, "Good morning." Her voice carried warmth, like the rising sun. Elias handed her a cup of warm tea he had made. She took it gratefully, wrapping her hands around it. "Where we go today?" she asked. Elias looked out over the valley. "I was thinking we could follow the river," he said. "It might lead us to good land, maybe even a place to stay." Nayeli's eyes brightened. "A home?" she asked softly, almost as if afraid to hope. "Maybe," Elias said with a gentle smile. "A new beginning." They packed their few things and set off once again, following the path beside the river. The air was cool and sweet, and birds sang from the trees. Nayeli picked a few wildflowers and tucked them behind her ear. Elias watched her, thinking how she seemed to belong to the land, as if the desert and sky themselves had shaped her spirit. They walked for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes quiet. Nayeli told him about her tribe's traditions, how they thanked the earth after every meal, how they danced for rain, and how they believed that love was not about owning, but about understanding. Elias listened closely, her words touching something deep within him. When the sun was high, they found a meadow surrounded by tall cottonwoods. The grass was soft and the river made a gentle curve nearby. Elias stopped his horse and looked around. "This place," he said softly, "feels right." Nayeli looked too. The wind moved through the grass like waves on water. The sound of it was peaceful. "Yes," she whispered. "Very right." They decided to rest there for a few days. Elias built a small shelter from branches and canvas, and Nayeli gathered herbs and flowers from the field. Together they made the place feel alive. Not fancy, not grand, but full of care. At night they sat by a small fire, listening to the sounds of crickets and the river. The stars above were bright and the sky seemed endless. One night Nayeli said quietly, "I never think I find peace again, but now, I feel it." Elias turned to her, his eyes warm. "You deserve peace," he said. "You've earned it." She looked at him and smiled. "You too." Days passed and the small meadow began to feel like home. They built a better shelter from stones and wood. Nayeli taught Elias how to weave mats from grass and how to find edible roots. Elias, in turn, showed her how to tend a fire during wind and how to make tools from metal scraps he carried. They worked together with easy rhythm, learning from each other, trusting one another completely. Sometimes they would take long walks by the river. Nayeli would sing softly as they walked, her voice blending with the sounds of nature. Elias never grew tired of listening. One evening, as they watched the sunset, she said, "You have good eyes." He laughed. "Good eyes? What do you mean?" "You see the world gentle," she explained. "Most people look and see only trouble. You look and see beauty." Elias thought about that. "Maybe I didn't always," he said quietly. "But I'm learning," she nodded, smiling. "Learning is good. Heart grows when we learn." Every day became a small story of its own, simple but full of meaning. Elias fixed the fence near the water, while Nayeli planted small seeds she had saved in a pouch. They didn't know if the plants would grow in such dry land, but they hoped. Hope, they had learned, was the strongest thing they carried. As the weeks passed, the meadow changed. Tiny green shoots began to appear where Nayeli had planted. Birds built nests in the trees above their home. The world around them seemed to respond to their peace, as if nature itself was welcoming their new beginning. One afternoon, Elias sat carving a small wooden charm. When Nayeli asked what it was, he said, "It's for you. A memory." She took it gently. It was shaped like a bird, wings open wide. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's how I see you," Elias said, smiling. "Free and strong." She looked at the carving for a long moment, then said quietly, "You make me remember who I am." Elias shook his head. "You never forgot. You just needed someone to remind you." That evening they shared dinner as the sky turned purple and gold. The warmth between them had grown into something deep and quiet. Not rushed, not uncertain, but steady. They didn't need to name it. It was there in the way they looked at each other, in the way they moved together, in the calm they shared. When the moon rose high, Elias said softly, "You know, when I first saw you, I thought I was saving you." She looked at him with a gentle smile. "And now?" He paused. "Now I think, maybe you saved me too." She didn't answer right away. She simply reached out and took his hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like two rivers meeting at last. The fire crackled softly nearby, and the night wrapped around them like a blanket. In the days that followed, they began to dream of the future. Naeli spoke of building a garden near the river. Elias planned to make a small barn for more animals. Together, they imagined a life filled with simple joys, growing food, watching the seasons change, and living in peace. One morning, as the sun rose over their valley, Naeli stood by the water and whispered a quiet prayer in her native language. Elias stood a few steps behind, listening. When she turned around, she said, "I thank the sky for bringing you." He smiled softly. "And I thank it for bringing me here." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and warm. It felt like a blessing. Years later, people passing through the valley would sometimes stop and speak of a quiet ranch near the river, of a kind man with steady hands and a woman with eyes like the desert dawn. They would say the two lived simply, growing their food, tending their animals, and helping any traveler who came their way. No one knew the full story, but some whispered that the woman had once been the last Apache captive in the region, and that a cowboy had chosen compassion over cruelty. Whether that was true or not didn't matter to them. To those who met Elias and Naeli, they were just two people who had found something rare: peace, love, and belonging. In the quiet evenings, when the stars began to shine, Elias and Naeli would sit together outside their small home, watching the world rest. Sometimes she would hum a song and he would close his eyes, letting the melody carry him to dreams of a past that no longer hurt. They had both lost much in life, but together they had built something that could never be taken away. A home, a friendship, and a love that grew not from need or rescue, but from understanding and kindness. As the night sky stretched wide above them, Naeli would sometimes whisper, "The sky sees everything," and Elias, looking up at the stars beside her, would reply, "Then it knows we are happy." The wind would move softly through the grass, the river would murmur nearby, and the land, once filled with sorrow, would rest in peace. And so their story ended not in sorrow or separation, but in quiet joy. Two hearts who found each other in a broken world and learned that love, in its truest form, is simply the courage to begin again.